I came up listening to rock and pop like other kids my age, the Monkees and the Beatles, which was already an archaic grouping of recordings to be listening to at that time, when my buddies were into Kiss and such bands. But I would say the Beatles were probably the earliest musical influence. But my tastes were expanded and awakened quite quickly to jazz due to my parents' 600 LP plus record collection, which was chock full of incredible big band recordings. Jimmy Lunceford, Count Basie, Duke Ellington. Pianists, Fats Waller, Teddy Wilson, Art Tatum. What a great foundation that laid for me, and I feel lucky to have had access to that at such an early age. My piano teacher was Lester Carr from Chevy Chase, Maryland. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and Lester Carr was a very fine, if a little bit under the radar, pianist. He wasn't that well known, but he was a student of Teddy Wilson, and I feel that there was a lineage of pianistic lineage passed from Teddy to Les to myself, and that's in terms of both theory and technique. I was very much a product of what you could call the Teddy Wilson school of Teddy Wilson's piano method, I suppose you could almost say. Well, I'd have to rank Teddy Wilson quite high. Also Art Tatum, Oscar Peterson, Ahmad Jamal, Bill Evans, Monty Alexander. And one mustn't leave out Duke Ellington, one of the greatest jazz pianists. In fact, one critic said that if Duke had done nothing but play piano, he would still be one of the all-time greats, in spite of the fact that his playing was overshadowed by his writing. Count Basie was another great pianist. I'd have to say the strongest influence on my playing was via Art Tatum, pretty much without doubt. Many hours.
You can hear that in your playing. It's really palpable.
I'm glad. I'm glad that comes through in my playing, and hopefully not as an imitation, but just as an important influence. And a wellspring for me to express my creativity, but coming from the Tatum School. One of the first jazz events I ever witnessed, I was a very small boy. My parents took the family to Georgetown University to hear Duke Ellington in concert. It was the year of Duke Ellington's death. And I was given a copy of his autobiography, which was titled Music is My Mistress, which I stood in line to have Duke sign after the gig. And I observed him sitting like a Maharaja, surrounded by beautiful women and admirers, looking very much like a king. I didn't quite understand everything that was going on, but the music had an incredible impact, and I think that kind of steered me towards the direction I took. Duke Ellington was a regal emissary of music, and his musicians, the way they spoke and talked and everything, they all were exhibiting what somebody once called the Ellingtonian effect. You know, it was a mixture of, down-home cool with very sophisticated, urbane way, and charming and all that stuff, but sincere and all that. I would say Duke Ellington was fascinating as a musician, but also as an individual. I met Carlton Drinkard in my senior year of high school. I was going to Atlantic City High School. The family had moved, and Carlton had been Billie Holiday's accompanist on and off for her last 10 or so years on stage. And he was loosely portrayed by Richard Pryor in the movie Lady Sings the Blues. They called him Piano Man. In any case, he was also very influential on me. He helped me form my first trio, and he rehearsed us and arranged gigs for us. He got us a gig at the Newport Jazz Festival. He still knew a lot of people and was very influential. And I learned a great deal from him. I probably didn't fully grasp the significance of some of the people that I encountered. Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing, because you know, if you're too in awe of a person, you might act a little stilted in their presence. But hanging out with people like Lionel Hampton, for example, was the most natural thing in the world for me. You know, music was a fraternity, and if you could play, I think that was the qualifying factor to be in that fraternity. Very interesting story of how I met Lionel Hampton. Lionel Hampton's orchestra was playing, his big band was playing in the mid-1980s at a casino, hotel casino in Atlantic City. It was then called the Golden Nugget. And he was playing a high roller party on their main stage, $1,500 a plate, that sort of thing. I walked in past the security guards, and I was underage, and I found some door going backstage, and I found Lionel Hampton, who had just come off stage, perspiring profusely, you know. And I marched right over to him, and I introduced myself. I said, I'm a pianist. I would love to play with you sometime. And at that moment, Paul Jeffrey, a saxophone player, who had played with Thelonious Monk and Dizzy Gillespie and others, knew me quite well and was sort of an educator, mentor in my life at that time. And he talked me up to Mr. Hampton. The next thing I knew, I was invited to Lionel's apartment up in 1 Lincoln Plaza, just across from Lincoln Center, auditioning for him. The audition consisted of 3 or 4 hours of just jamming. It was great, and I instantly got the gig. 3 days after that, I was jet bound for a tour of the West Coast. Wow. So things happened pretty quickly there. Lionel Hampton's repertoire at that time, he was sort of in the last quarter of his career, I guess you could say. He was playing a mixture of the swing standards that he had made famous, like Flying Home and Hamp's Boogie Woogie and things like that. And then we were also playing very advanced arrangements of Freddie Hubbard, John Coltrane tunes, Joe Henderson tunes, things like that. And he was keeping right up with the times, you know. He was a very forward-thinking musician. So, like, on the one hand, we'd be playing, you know, Flying Home, Hamp's Boogie Woogie. And then we had those songs in the book, and then he would do things like we had a piece called Minor Thesis, Jodo. That kind of modal playing, you know. And he was right there with it. And he was playing Giant Steps by John Coltrane. Fast. And he was in his almost 80 years old. With Lionel Hampton, I learned about playing in a versatile setting with a band where you're required to adapt to different types of eras of music and grooves of music. Some of his music was almost like rock and roll, and then other types of his music were very modern. And then he also played pretty ballads and everything in between. So we had to be very adaptable, flexible, and we had to think very quickly, going from arrangement to arrangement. He was also a great showman. He had great humor on stage. He was good to his musicians. I think in every positive way I learned something from Lionel Hampton. It was a great experience for me from every possible perspective. I've been playing at the Boysdale since its inception in around 1999, during its first run. Yeah, around 15 years. It's pretty much every year I've done at least a short run there, some longer than others. These last 3 years, I've played there for long stints each time. And it's wonderful, playing in all 3 venues. Bishopsgate here in Canary Wharf and in Belgravia. All 3 Boysdale venues have a distinctive vibe, such as down in the Bishopsgate venue, I play quite a lot of solo piano, which I think the music lovers and patrons appreciate a lot. It's more intimate. It's sort of a saloon setting, a fancy saloon setting. It's very atmospheric. And then at Belgravia, it's more of a combo setting and a different set of fans there. And likewise, here at Canary Wharf, it's very inspiring to play at these venues. Pretty much non-stop at the 3 Boysdales, save for a couple of side concerts in outlying areas, but pretty much staying on track here at the Boysdales. From August 11th through September 2nd, actually, which completes my run.